Hello, everybody. This is a short loom lecture for a form time topic. We've looked at why there were protests over the summer where they toppled the statues of the slave traders, particularly the one in Bristol. Well, how bad was slavery? This is going to be pretty shocking. So just listen carefully and have a look at these pictures, and I'll show you how bad slavery was. Just think, first of all, what it was like for those Africans who were taken against their will, kidnapped basically, dragged on board the ship by these white sailors. They will never see their family again. They don't know what the hell is happening to them. And they're being forced down into the interior of the ship. And they're going to be chained and shackled and taken across the Atlantic Ocean. The journey will take about 3 months and it will be absolute hell. Also have a look at the whip, which will be used against any of them who dare to complain or dare to fight back. And of course, they can't communicate with the white people because they can't speak the white people's language. So it is pretty awful. And these are just a few slaves. If you were to cover the whole period when the slave trade was going on, which is something like 300 years, we're talking about over 1 million African people taken against their will and forced into slavery. It really is as bad as that. So, what was it like when they were inside the slave ship? There's 2 drawings. One of them shows you as you're looking down into the ship, and look how closely they're packed together. Something like 30% of those people will not survive the voyage across the Atlantic Ocean. They will die, and their bodies will be just thrown overboard to feed the sharks in the Atlantic. And no thought will be made other than, well, we won't make as big a profit perhaps if we get all of them over, but they'll still make a handsome profit. They were taken up and given some fresh air and exercise from time to time, and they were taught to dance to the sound of the whip, and that was the only kind of relief they had. If you look on the right hand side, you can see them there packed in together. No more space than you would have for a coffin. But of course, these people are alive and they've got to try and exist. And can you imagine what the smell, what the stench would have been like? Very, very primitive toilet conditions, filth everywhere, saliva, vomit, blood, whatever you can imagine. It was absolute hell on earth. And you just cannot, can you just imagine how one group of human beings can treat another group of human beings like that, simply because they just happen to have a different colour skin? You know, how bad can you get? How wicked, how cruel can you get to actually do something as bad as that? That is just unbelievable. But if anything, it gets worse. It gets worse. When they arrived in the New World, in terms of the British Empire, let's think of something like an island such as Jamaica, which was the biggest sugar-producing island in the Caribbean Sea for the British. They were treated like animals. They were given they were sold, first of all, on a slave auction, and they were pressed and they were prodded. Their muscles, their teeth, see how healthy they were. And then once they were bought, they were given initials. So that African woman is now the property of a slave owner. Let's say the slave owner's name was Jeremiah Hudson. Then JH, the initials JH, would be burned on her back. And you know that sheep are branded. You know that cattle are branded. Horses are branded sometimes. But to actually brand a human being, to put a red hot poker with the initials on, you can imagine the pain. And the absolute unbelievable indignity of it. That's a human being. And yet she's being treated as if she was a sheep or cattle or whatever. She's just an animal in the view of these people here. They don't seem to be showing any emotion. They don't seem to be showing any remorse. They don't seem to be showing any kind of pity, compassion, or anything. And that is what happens when you treat people as if they are not human. If you dehumanize them, there is actually a word in the English language called dehumanization, and that is a classic example of dehumanization. She will have no rights. She will not get paid. She'll be fed and she'll be given a cabin to live in, and she will have to work for the rest of her life for a master, unless, of course, he decides to sell her on to somebody else. She will lose control over her children if she has any children. She'll never see her husband again if she's married, and she will be an object in every sense of the word. And the things that were done to some of the African women to satisfy the lusts of slave owners is something which is quite appalling, which I would not be able to tell you, but it was absolutely awful. So treated like animals, that's about the best way of putting it. They worked in the plantations. These are the sugar plantations. And as you can see, it would be under a hot sun, and they would be cutting the sugar cane, which would be turned into the crop of sugar, which is going to produce massive profits, because sugar was a big commodity in Britain and in the whole of Europe at the time. Everybody wanted to get hold of sugar to put into tea and coffee and so forth, and confectionery. So sugar was really important and very profitable, and that's the work that had to be done. And you can see in the background there, one slave is failing to do as much work as he should do, and the punishment is to be whipped. Now just think about, if you've seen enough horrors and cruelties, just think of the cruelty of bringing a whip upon somebody's back. Well, this is not from the British Empire, this is from the United States. But this slave was whipped many, many times. And if you look at his back, it is crisscrossed with what's called the wheel of the whip, the cut mark that goes deep into the skin. And those scars will last for the rest of his life. This slave was rescued from slavery by the abolitionists. The abolitionists were white people who wanted to get rid of slavery. And they took this photograph to show how bad the treatment was. So the slave agreed to show his back to the photographer so that other white people could actually realize how bad that treatment was. And just think about it. Every time he didn't work hard enough, every time perhaps he showed some dissent, every time he maybe made a mistake in the work that he was doing, that is what he got, a whip. And there was nothing he could do about it. To just think how bad that is. And all those profits, all that money that was to be made by the slaves would go into building wonderful houses for the slave owners, mansions. Look at that. Think that creates that. All that work done by the slaves creates massive, massive profits for the slave owners. And that's how they lived. And of course, they used some of the slaves as servants to work inside. They weren't treated as badly as the ones out on the plantation, but they were still slaves. And there's another point. Even if you had a situation where a slave was not ever whipped, let's say the master was unusually kind by the standards of the time, it's still wrong, because he shouldn't be enslaved, or she shouldn't be enslaved in the first place. Now, having having seen those unbelievable horrors, we come now to the anger that was shown over the summer when they toppled the statue, and all linked in with the Black Lives Matter. Now, if you were treated like that, or if your ancestors were treated like that, how angry would you be? So just look at the anger and imagine what the anger is, and just think of what you've just seen. There's that, and there's that, and there's that, and there's the whipping, and all that to make money for a few. So I'll do it again. We can go back to the first slide as well. We can do the whole series of the slides. There's that, the initial putting them on board the ship. Then there's that, that, leading to that, and that. This anger is built up over a long period of time. And it's not just that it was white people doing bad things to black people, because there were black people in Africa who sold the slaves in the first place. And in terms of slavery, it's not just white people who've been involved in slave trading. Not at all. But in terms of what happened in both Britain and the United States, it is essentially a story of what some white people did to black people. So can you see the anger that has been building up over a long period of time? And for some reason, in this summer, with all the other things going on, this anger kind of built up, and it's a bit like when you heat water, it boils over in the end. And this was an example of how it boiled over. So just think about that in terms of the way in which the black people were treated. Thank you very much.